Jen,
Hi.
how's it going?
Good. Happy to be here with you guys. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy that you're here. We've had some good conversations together about your business. Without giving it all away, for me talking, I'd love to hear more about what you do.
Thanks for asking. So I run Productive Conflict LLC. It's a leadership development, conflict management business.
Okay.
And I basically work with a lot of leaders around the country, Canada included, so around North America, and help them face conflict with professionalism, with strategy, and with some skills.
Yep.
So anytime people want to shy away, I encourage them to just develop a bit more strategy and to think about some of those blocks so they can overcome them.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a new one for me. Conflict strategist. Huh? That's awesome. That's awesome. So, what got you into that?
Oh, yeah. So many things. And what I love to lead with is I've actually always hated conflict, which is 90% of my clients just hate conflict.
Yeah.
So I say that's normal. It's just uncomfortable. So what got me into it was hoping to find a better way. So there's many times where conflict takes us out, professionally and personally.
Facts.
It drains us, and it makes us feel a little less confident in some social settings, in some professional settings. So I wanted to find a better way, and that was my big driver from the beginning. As a young person, I noticed a lot of conflict. I watched a lot of conflict. I saw conflict in my family. I saw conflict in my community. I saw conflict politically growing up. I grew up in Montreal, Quebec. We had 2 separation movements while I was there. And it's quite something to watch, where friends become enemies very quickly.
Oh my God.
And I kept thinking there's got to be a better way, at least on the family front, at least in the workplace. And so I had that question of how do we make conflict creative or a little bit more productive?
What are some of the difficult challenges that you've seen that is pretty common that everyone faces?
Definitely conflict avoidance and the assumption that conflict is a bad thing.
Wow.
No matter what you do, it's going to be bad, right? That's that big assumption. And when you think about maybe your oldest friends, right? You guys have been through a lot, right? When you got old friends.
Ups and downs.
Ups and downs. You've been through fights. You've probably been through like some hard times, but that brought you closer and closer together.
Right.
And that's what it is. Like conflict has that potential. I said, well, if we can do it with our best friends, how come we can't do it with other people?
I think the hard part is, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, it's related to the trust that you would give to another person. So say even if it's like, say, an employee, there is some sort of trust and there's also some sort of lack of trust per se, because you don't know if they can perform the job correctly. So at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to, avoid conflict because everyone has their own goals. Everyone has their own type of thing they're trying to achieve. And we're all just part of each other's lives, right?
Absolutely. And it is hard to avoid conflict.
100%.
And that's why, although we want to, and although we might have some assumptions about what conflict means and how negative it might feel, we have an obligation as business owners, as leaders, to step up and step into conflict and help not just solve it for ourselves, but help our team feel empowered to face it and solve it.
Right.
And you're right, trust is a big one. And so much about conflict shows you what the relationship has been up until this point. Has it been solid? Have you been building it? Or is it yet to be built?
So I got a hunch then, just in thought, in hindsight, would a lot of conflict avoidance come from ego or any type of like thinking that, oh, I don't want to be wrong in this situation, so I'll just not even deal with it? Or is that in the ballpark?
It's definitely in the ballpark. And I want to hesitate because I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak too much to ego. But I can say from my work and anecdotally, it is such an important part of the experience, right? If you get caught up in your ego, you're probably not going to admit when you're wrong. You're probably going to have some hesitation to be humble.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's going to hold you back. It's going to hold you back in some relationships, and it's also going to hold you back as a leader, because leaders can be really strong and humble at the same time. And that's the art of creative conflict.
And I would say that too, with like, in terms of leadership, it's kind of hard to say what one leadership strategy is better than the other, because it relates to what you said again. Like, of course, I'm not a psychologist either, but, psychology plays a lot into it when it comes to working with other people. No matter if it becomes like, say, something you're trying to work on, I have my own things that I want to do,
Mhm.
and say if it doesn't align with what you're trying to give me, sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's where I say some conflict really starts up.
Absolutely. And in the literature too, that's called basically a resource conflict. We want something, we might
Mhm.
want the same thing, or we might want different things, but we're focused on that thing.
Right.
And what I ask people to do is, okay, you might want that thing, but let's also talk about why you want that thing, what that thing means to you and in the relationship. And if we can step up into the values conversation, we can now have a richer conversation, and we
Mhm.
can find creative pathways through and not just get stuck on that thing.
Right.
Turn her mic up a little bit more. The reason I
Yeah.
asked that question was because I was a psychology major at one point in time in my studies, and then I dropped it and changed to philosophy and then some other things, and ended up finishing with the liberal arts. But that was just one of those degrees. I realized in those studies is that I had a problem with ego and with pride, and so that's why I'm thinking like, okay, a lot of the conflicts that I had in the past that weren't resolved was due to me and my big head and my ego and my pride, and not saying like, no, there's no way, I know exactly what I'm talking about and you're wrong. And it's like, okay, you can try to approach any type of conflict situation like that and you're going to beat your head against a wall. So that's why I asked that question.
I love that you shared that because it's so true for all of us.
Mm.
We're
Mhm.
all battling that ego.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care who you are and how much you've studied or how much you've been in leadership. It's
Right.
just we're all facing that. And there are things that will get us going all over again. So I work
Yeah.
with people and I always
Like
start
triggers?
with triggers.
Mhm.
Yes. My program, my coaching program always starts with triggers, values, needs.
Mhm.
And it all feeds into who you are. Who you are as a leader and how you show up in conflict. And we got to constantly take stock on that and think about how is that ego showing up today?
Right.
How am I learning from it? And I love that you just spoke so clearly to it because it shows that you've really done the work.
No.
And you keep doing the work
Yeah,
every day,
it's-
right?
it's
like
forever.
it's exhausting, but it's great.
Yeah, it is.
And I get people thinking in that way all the time. Ego is such a big, important factor in all our interactions.
It's actually crazy that it reminded me of this one book that I really love. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Mm.
I'm not sure if you guys have read
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
That book I dive into a lot because it really explains on how we interact with each other and the psychology behind it. Because, you know, like what I was saying before, everyone has a thing that they want, but to really give yourself to someone to be able to listen, to be able to understand what they're saying, look at their point of view, and all that, that takes time and that takes a lot of patience.
And
which-
vulnerability too.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So that part of yourself giving away and supporting another person, don't know how, but maybe you can touch up on it. How do we come there? How do we
Strengthen
get
those
there?
muscles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Going straight to the tough questions. I love it. So much in there.
yeah.
And I think it always starts with you
Hmm.
and how much you've grounded yourself in who you are and how much you're able to forgive yourself when you're learning, because learning means making mistakes.
Right.
Can you forgive yourself for the mistake? And can you create a new pathway forward?
Hmm.
So don't make the same mistake again, make a new mistake. Get excited to make some new mistakes
Right.
and build that into your life and your tolerance. And then build that into your relationships too.
Hmm.
So how do you have space for mistakes and understanding and being understood within the relationship?
Hmm.
How are you asking the questions to allow people to grow with you in that conversation?
Wow. I like that. That's homework. That's, you know,
It's always homework.
You gotta put the work in. I love that.
You know, it's hard to own up to your mistake.
Yeah.
So like having a way for someone to really dive in and choosing to accept the mistake, how do we function as individuals to really learn from our mistakes? What have you seen?
Right. Well, certainly some huge mistakes in conflict for all of us in this world. What have I seen? Well, I've seen, again, it goes back to the ego work, right? Like, are they able to face? Am I able to face? Are we able to face our ego?
Mhm.
And to say, well, you know what? Yeah, we have made a mistake.
Mhm.
Can we admit we've made a mistake, right? And then can we tolerate this journey through that mistake together?
Right.
And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, how is this relationship so far? Because if our relationship is weak, the tolerance will be thin,
Mhm.
right? And you need to think about, okay, as I'm growing that space for tolerance, how am I demonstrating that this time will be different?
Mhm.
How am I demonstrating that I am trustworthy again?
Wow.
I love that because it's not just in the business aspect. Like you can
That's
really
in
relate
life.
that
Oh,
Yeah.
for life. You know?
definitely, definitely. I have a lot of my clients tell me, "Oh my goodness, you've just helped my marriage." It's
Wow.
like, okay, it's not my job, but yeah, I'm glad,
Yeah.
and I'm glad it has some transferable.
Yeah. There was this one part of that book that I mentioned.
Mhm.
These group of women went to church and they did a volunteer thing. And one of the things that they were challenged to do is go to your husband and say 5 things that they don't like about you. And the husband has also been going to some classes, learning about communication. So what they did when the wife came in was like asking those questions, right? He told his wife that let me have a day to think about it. The next day, he showed up with 5 roses and said, I can't find anything wrong about you. It's more or less about trying to make sure that, like, we all have our own, like, demons in our heads. And really learning from that is productive.
That's a great concept and a great way to view how to resolve certain conflicts or certain issues that you might have with an individual, especially someone that's close to you as your wife. My question would be, if you gave us some of the homework that you can work on, how do you develop the skills to then identify those points in which you need to work on?
Yeah, great question. So a couple of the ways is observation. So, I know it sounds like we're going back a little bit here, but it's really for the bigger step we're about to take. So when you start observing, and when I'm saying observing, not just things, but patterns,
Okay.
right? So we want to get that pattern spotting type behavior in place. In general, what do you notice? Contradictions, surprises, what do you wonder about? These are general pattern spotting questions that I've taken from the complexity science world and brought into my conflict world.
Mm.
And so when you're looking at that, I'm going to pause. I just totally lost your question.
No, how do you develop the skills? So you,
I was going down a workshop route right there.
no, that was you. I was following you.
I was going,
like,
yeah,
wait,
I was
wait, wait.
listening everything.
Yeah, how do you develop the skills to then
That's great.
you
You're
know,
super
pattern,
patient
pattern
with me.
spot and everything?
Yeah. So developing.
I love it. No, I love it.
Definitely, yeah.
I'm here for
I was
it
on
all.
I was on a road. Like,
Thanks for going down
following
that road with
everything.
me.
Yeah.
No worries. No worries.
No, we love that. Like, all of our conversations here are meant to be real.
Yeah.
It's
We have
all
no
meant
idea.
to. Yeah, so it's like even if a question doesn't get answered, it's more or less like we think all differently.
Yeah.
It's like as business owners, we measure a lot of things in our heads that might not even make sense
Right.
at the
Right.
time.
True.
And then when you try to put it on paper, it's just like that actually makes no sense. So
I love it. Well, so when I'm coaching leaders and even when I'm advising people in a group setting, so building skills starts with pattern spotting, right? How are you spotting the patterns? Because if you don't see it, you can't change it. And you can't build a skill on something you don't recognize. And what I mean, recognize it not just as we talk to each other, but like, what about when we leave this room? What are the things you notice?
right.
What are the things you notice when you're in your car driving? Do you notice the things that other drivers do that are wrong? Do you notice the beautiful gestures that might happen on the roadside?
Perspective.
What are you noticing?
I
Right?
see.
And you get a little bit of a deeper window into that
Mhm.
because what you notice matters to what you're building on through your skill practice.
Right.
And skill practice could be anything from some of the handouts I offer my clients on triggers, on boundaries, on needs, and even on styles of negotiation. And you can read lots of books, but when you go in and you want to build skills, observe, notice what you're seeing, notice what you're paying attention to,
Okay.
and then you can go deeper into some of that practice element. So how does that change when your perspective changes?
Okay.
How does that change when your position changes, right? When you're in the car versus out of the car, when you're in the workplace or out of the workplace, when you're noticing infractions or when you're noticing successful stories.
Mhm.
Okay. Dope. So observation
Right.
is one of the first works.
For those who are just listening, you are talking to. This is Talking Growth with Jen. Productive conflict. We're going about her background and also how she deals with conflict and working with clients and building the skills that you need to develop.
So you left off on success, being successful in observing and figuring out those pattern spotting. What successes have you seen in your craft and working with other clients or in your business? So
Layers of success for sure.
love
I would say what I love the most is when I hear back from a client, whether it's a few weeks to a few years after we've been coaching together, and they tell me, wow, Jen, like I am facing this conflict and I don't feel as anxious about it. I feel more successful, my relationships are improving, and my effectiveness as a leader has just like skyrocketed. And I've worked with people that were in government, they were directors, they became assistant deputy ministers. This is Canada.
Okay.
Sorry. And yeah, so just watching them rise in rank. So their confidence is rising, their rank is rising, and they're in step. They're doing good stuff, right? And that's huge. That's a great success.
Okay.
Personally, I look at every conflict I face, because working in conflict does not make me immune from conflict. I face it all the time. I face my ego. I face the things that I want to be, the things that I'm not yet. And I believe in practicing everything I preach. Everything I get clients to do, I do myself.
Right. Your business is very unique, because like the way that we deal with things, we're always stuck on kind of the what's in front of us, that we don't really focus on the internals of what's causing something bad to happen to begin with. There was a person that mentioned about how there's a statistic where people who work together, say there's one person that is a high performer, right? But when that person is sitting with a low performer, that their performance, that high performance goes down, but the low performance goes up.
Right.
So it's more or less like we are so embedded in our own heads that we don't see past what's going on, and how do we like live up to our ambitions, our dreams. Like conflict is a huge thing, because it's not only external, but it's internally in your head.
Absolutely. And being able to look at both simultaneously is huge. Can you see yourself in the moment, and can you see the patterns that you're a part of?
Right.
Can you think in these scales? Individual, collective, structural. There's always multiple scales that you can be looking at. And a good leader is scanning all the scales. The way you're in a car scanning all the mirrors. Always scanning, right? But we can get stuck on one plane. We can get stuck in the immediate so easily, because our work, our day life, everything points us in that direction.
Right.
You got to do this now. And I've seen directors move from thing to thing to thing, and they go straight to burnout. Right? So stepping back and seeing, what are the patterns here? Yeah, I'm getting a lot of things done.
Yep.
I'm getting a lot of boxes checked off. And even on the HR front, right, when I'm coaching leaders to manage some hot conflicts, right, you might be ticking those boxes, but what's the larger pattern you're working towards? For some, it needs to be an organizational culture change, not just an immediate conflict resolution. For others, it needs to be self-management, and not just what you manage today, but how is your management pattern for people and for yourself, energy-wise and relationally, going over time? What does it look like over the year, not just the day?
I'm mind blown by this, because it has so many applications and so many different levels to this, you know, like the high admin down to the common worker. So everybody that's listening to this, please make sure that you reach out to Jen and you pick her brain, because what you don't get from this podcast episode or radio episode, I'm pretty sure that there's something in her arsenal that you can utilize for your benefit. Because I'm sitting here thinking about all the times that I've, like, you know, didn't see what I was doing wrong, or didn't see my patterns that I was creating. And then as I start doing the work that you're talking about, which I started doing the work without even talking to you, but still got more work to do. I'm like, now I'm realizing, like, oh man, I do that. Oh, I do say that.
Yeah.
I do say that too many times. And so,
Yeah.
man.
Would you say that we have common behaviors that we do all the time? And I guess adding on top of that, for a successful leader, what is a common behavior?
Oh, wow. Two good questions. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm going to start with the first, because there are lots of common behaviors. And I like to start with just baselining it is we all have securities and insecurities. And the behaviors that come from each place, quite common, right? We might shy away from things. We might engage in things. So we might lean in, lean out.
Right.
Might step in, step out. This is all like, you know, people get nervous going into difficult conversations. That is across the board. What does that mean for success? The most successful leaders transform that, oh my goodness, energy into, let's find out what we can do next.
Let's get her done.
Let's
I
get
love
some
that.
curiosity in here. That changes the game entirely. And
Okay.
successful leaders always can focus on curiosity.
I love that, because I actually just had a conversation about curiosity.
And it doesn't always kill the cat, does it?
It does not always kill the cat, because I've always been an advocate telling people don't follow your passion, follow your curiosity,
Mm.
because your curiosity is a lot with what is in the now. A lot of people focus too much on the future, or a lot of people focus too much on the past. It depends on which one you're focusing on, because you don't know if it's dark and gloomy at the end or if it was dark and gloomy in the beginning. But what you can only do is figure out what is dark and gloomy right now. You
And
know?
that is so good to reflect on in general and for conflict.
Mhm.
We're so concerned, and people avoid conflict because they're so concerned about what's going to happen next or what happened just before. Well, what about right now?
Mhm.
How can you be in the presence of a conflict, stay curious, stay in the moment, drop into your feelings
Mhm.
so that when you take action, it's coming from a place of, I know how I feel, and I know how to best respond based on what I can do in this space.
Mm.
And I can stay curious because what I can always do is ask another question.
Mm.
Right. That's the thing. It's like when we dive into our curiosity, that's the biggest part that I at least have made me become successful in my own right. You know, it's being continuous with your journey to be curious is always good.
Yeah.
But you can't be too curious because you don't know what's behind the veil.
Right. And speaking to fear there as well, right? So,
Yeah.
what stops us from being curious? When we're afraid, when
Mhm.
we're anxious, when we're worried about something. Usually that something is out of our control.
Mm.
And the antidote to that is to ask more questions, is to be curious. So we're kind of in a bit of a paradox here.
Right.
And it's easy to get all caught up, but if we just make it a little simpler, right? Like, what's just one little question I can ask, whether it's myself or someone else,
Okay.
right? Like, we might be in this conflict and I'm like, I don't really know what's going on, I'm missing something. How do you know which question to ask? Start looking at your assumptions.
Mm.
What are you assuming? And that should give you an indication of what the next question should be. And just that one simple act of changing that assumption into a question and then asking it
Right.
is like a great step
Don't
out of
presume.
fear, out of anxiety,
I
and
love
into
that.
conversation.
I really love that. Because
That's
like
dope.
that, you just touched on a good chunk of what fear is too. Is because um, having these assumptions, we live. Like, it's literally like everything what you're saying. It's not just business. This is life, and in business. So I'm gonna relate it to business now, which these assumptions that you have of say a client, for example, right?
Yep.
Say going in and having a conversation with someone, and say the client comes to you and say I want this thing done, but they don't know exactly what they're asking for. So most of the time they have these assumptions of how to get it done,
Mm-hmm.
but the person that's also making it also have an assumption of how to get it done. The person that is making it should remove their assumption
Ask questions.
to be able to ask questions, and that's how you work and be more successful in business, because it builds
Absolutely.
relationships, it builds partnerships, it builds a lot of different things.
Absolutely.
I have an acronym for fear, and it's false evidence appearing real.
Ah,
And
nice.
I learned that from somebody, one of my mentors or something like that back in the day, and I've always used it. And now I'm teaching my kids that same thing, because fear is usually you're afraid of something that hasn't even happened yet. And it's a perfect segue into leading us to the next question, because we talked about the successes. What type of things creates failures in the world, and what type of curiosities leads people to down the wrong rabbit holes that end up projecting it to failure?
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest rabbit holes for curiosity is not curiosity itself, but when we get locked into a certain avenue of thinking. So I get curious and then I'm like, wow, that's where I want to go. And then you lock in. Now you've lost your curiosity. You think you're being curious, but you're not. And that's when the different types of questions, if you're going to assess like what you're doing, right? There's open-ended questions, closed questions, probing questions, leading questions. Lawyers know that one really well,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So, but
And
which
facts or
which types
false?
of questions are you asking?
Yeah.
Are you aware? Because when you're curious, you're asking open-ended questions.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of this? How's this? When you're asking a closed question, do you want this or that? Right? Leading question, like, so are you going to stop stealing those office supplies?
Well, I can see how all those create conflict in some way.
It could
Yeah.
all feed into it.
Wow.
And so you've lost your curiosity at some point, right?
Mhm.
Like, look back at those questions. Where did I lose my curiosity? And you can say that about any situation.
Okay.
Okay.
So rabbit hole is you think you're curious, but suddenly you've stepped into a line of questioning which is not actually curious.
So you end up closing the mind, closing the loop, and then
And I'm not going to say like closed questions, leading questions, probing questions, they all have their place. You want to close something off, you want to summarize, you want to come to conclusion. These are functional questions in a meeting or in a relationship, in a negotiation. And if you're trying to get away from fear, you need to stay curious.
Right.
You got to look in that closet, look under the bed, all those things you say to your kids, right?
Right.
Where are the monsters?
Right.
Let's go check.
Right.
Right.
What are we going to see?
Right.
What if we see them there? What do you get? Let's
Is it
get
a small monster? Or is
let's
it a
get
big
your
monster?
cape.
Yeah.
Let's get something to help you feel strong.
Mm.
That's what we do in conflict too. Oh yeah, I'm scared. Oh, why am I scared? What can I do to help me feel less scared so I can enter
Solutions.
into that with the energy of curiosity, right? And that energy
That's a
sets
good
me up
point.
for the right course of action.
Right.
And I'm aware of it so that I'm more in the driver's seat of how to use it next. I'm not
Right.
in the passenger seat waiting to be led around through a fear pattern.
I love that. For those who are just tuning in, we just talked about with Jen from Productive Conflict on curiosity, fear, and the reality of questioning. So I actually have a question related to curiosity. How does one spark their motivation from their curiosity? Like if somebody were to lose that curiosity, does that also mean that they lost that motivation?
Oh, that's a complex question.
Yeah.
Motivation and curiosity. Wow. So I'm going to work through this one.
Okay.
This is like...
It's a really
this
in-depth
is-
question.
This is a lot. I'm like, which angle to go through first?
Yeah.
So like when we talk about motivation too, like it can be linked to curiosity for sure. And again, I'm not a psychologist. We'll turn to you, Foster. You can ask. I studied anthropology as my undergrad, so
Oh, nice.
I stopped there.
Okay.
But when we start to kind of think about motivation, when we start to think about motivation as it's related to curiosity, we can see like an unmotivated person might ask fewer questions because they've already maybe checked out mentally or relationally, right? Like that loss of motivation signals some other things, some other self-care, some other changes that you need to be looking at on a deeper level. And when we're thinking about linking it up with curiosity, so if you want to self-watch here, those patterns, right? When are you most motivated? What happens to your sense of curiosity? Right? And again, I like to think about kids because they're so good at doing this naturally, right? What do kids do? What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? Can I touch that? Can I eat that? Can I
Or why?
throw that?
Why?
Can I
Yeah.
kick that?
Right.
Like, and imagine, I mean, we don't want a bunch of adults doing that, right? That'd be chaos. But we do need some of that energy in us because some of that is like when we're feeling low motivation, maybe we need some of that simple, like, what's that? What's that? Oh, I'm in the workplace. I feel totally stuck, surrounded by problems, surrounded by bills, surrounded by things to do.
Yep.
Oh, what if I just push that button?
Right.
What's going to happen? What's going to
What
happen?
door opens?
And even if that doesn't do anything, right? I'm not saying push that button, solve your problem. That'd be great. I would love that.
Right.
If somebody does that business,
Yeah,
Hey.
that's-
hey,
give me their
that's
number.
fair.
Light bulb.
But, if that changes your energy just a bit so that you can then ask another question, you're already stepping forward into a better terrain.
developing
You're
your
already helping
curiosity.
boost your motivation to stay engaged, to solve a problem, right? Now we're leaning into constructive solving of problems or creative problem solving,
Right.
which is a huge part of productive conflict. How do we turn this problem that we're facing into something creative? How do we generate more out of this? Not just split the pie in half, but collectively bake a new pie. And this is the negotiation example of like, sometimes zero-sum negotiation, win-lose, we cut the pie in half. And there are
Right.
many stories of doing this, right? But what if integrative bargaining, win-win, is about baking a new pie? What does that look like? Right? So we have a famous story. Fisher and Urey used it in the book Getting to Yes, but it's actually a story from Mary Parker Follett, a management theorist from the early 1920s, 1915s-ish.
Okay.
And she talked about this story of two kids wanting an orange. They're fighting and fighting and fighting. Parents are like, okay, it's enough,
Okay.
right? We all got to sleep.
Been there.
I'm sure. And, what do most parents do? What do you think most parents do?
They just take the orange out the equation, or
Take it away,
Yeah.
cut it in half.
I'll cut it in half.
Right?
Yeah.
So there we go. Zero-sum game, win-lose. Both kids are crying. They have half an orange. They're both miserable, right? Follett was like, well, did anyone ask the kids why they wanted that orange? right? And then we step back into that scenario. Okay, one kid, this is very convenient, of course. One kid wanted the rind to make a cake. The other kid wanted the juice to drink.
Wow.
They had an integrative solution embedded in that problem
love
that they never even asked the question to find out. Imagine. No one had to sacrifice anything in that scenario.
Wow, okay.
So not all scenarios are like that, but
Yeah.
more often than not, we are not even finding the scenarios that are like that and not even capitalizing on those integrative solutions.
Wow.
Imagine if we asked the right question.
I learned that in sales, but for a different reason completely, is qualifying questions. And I guess I don't always do that with the kids when they're in that conflict solution or conflict scenario.
My mind's pretty blown right now.
No, that's heavy. That's heavy. That's
Yeah.
heavy. Okay, I'm definitely taking that away.
Yeah. I think too, it's like what you're saying is this relates to our earlier conversations about assumptions. You know, it's like we assume that they want that thing, but we never really go about what is it actually that they're trying to use it for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know?
Hungry,
Yeah.
thirsty. You want to play ball with the orange? Or,
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the question I have for so many of my clients is in the workplace, how many things are happening that are more like that orange story?
Mhm.
How many times do you think you could have asked those questions and found an integrative solution?
Mhm.
And then we can start going through the inventory and saying, well, wait a second. Let's play that scenario back. I could have done this. What would have happened next? I don't know. Let's experiment. And then I turn my client into a researcher. Experimenting. You know, we can experiment in our relationships.
Yeah.
We create safe, controllable experiments,
Mhm.
and we do little by little. We build that trust. We build that curiosity. We build that understanding. We build that tolerance for questions so that we can actually find those integrative possibilities, right?
And in you doing that, I can already see that you have a lot of aha moments with your clients and a lot of like deductive reasoning where they're sitting there and they're like, wow.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting there having these things right now and we're not even in a session.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is.
I'm sure when you break it down to someone that works with you, like you really go deep into what's the root of the problem,
Yeah.
right? So for someone to really understand for themselves, how does one find the root of the problem? What is a way for someone to find
Call
the root of
Jen.
the problem? Call Jen.
Well, in fact, there are many ways,
Mm.
right? And some of it is just through deep introspection, right? Can you have that time with yourself? Can you ask yourself questions? Can you get past your ego
Mm.
Mhm.
and look at yourself and look at the patterns and say, what's really happening here, right?
Mhm.
And then also find support, right? You don't have to do it alone. And many
That's
of
big.
my most successful clients and the most inspiring business leaders, they know that they need to have good people around them. Just like we need a mirror, people are our mirrors, right?
Mhm.
Love
And they'll
that.
help us. They'll
Right.
help us see what we don't want to see. We have to really trust them, right? So
Mhm.
in our most trusted relationships, they can probably tell us things that no one else can tell us. These are the things we need to hear.
Mhm.
Okay.
We need to have feedback. So I work in conflict, I bring in power, and I bring in complexity. So from the power intelligence side of things, we talk about feedback as the lifeblood of leadership.
Feedback to life.
Have those people around you that give you the information. So if you want to change a pattern, if you want to set the tone in a new way, if you want to see things you couldn't see before, you can look within. You can also get other people to help see you.
Yeah.
And you can call me or anyone else
Right.
because having a coach is really great.
Mhm.
And so I spend a lot of time coaching people. I was a professional mediator back in Canada working for the government. And I eventually moved out of that and became a consultant with a company out of Minneapolis and then became productive conflict.
I love
And
that.
throughout the journey, I've kept workshops, I've done conflict resolution processes, group processes, and mediations, but I've moved more and more into coaching because that is where we can really transform the situation. Leaders have a lot of power, and leaders at all levels. So, looking within, getting trusted people around you, and then working with a coach because a coach can help you put things together, solve things faster, and yeah, have a lot of those aha moments.
Mhm.
Because in a conversation like this, I listen for patterns and I throw them back out there and I'm like, oh, what if we put these two things together?
Yeah.
Or what about that? Or how come you said that and then you said that? It's like, well, wait a second.
Well,
There's lots of opportunities here to like build skills and develop new pathways.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack, and
a lot of
definitely
room for growth.
there's a lot of room for growth. And
You guys have the best podcast name.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
thank you. It's you know, I lost my train of thought.
Speaking of all this
Me
growth,
too.
right?
Yeah.
You're giving so many people without you even knowing, you might know, but the opportunities and the skills and the tools for success, as well as for the tools for growth. How can we help you grow as a person, as a business, using our platform or our brains or whatever? What is there anything that we could do for you?
Oh, well, it's such a generous question, and just inviting me to speak has been wonderful. So thank you for that,
Oh,
and
no
making
worries.
space for other business owners as well.
Hmm.
And I think as we work together as a community to share what other people do,
Right.
that's the best gift.
Yeah.
It
What I
really is.
realized is, I think it's from being in Kauai for long enough that we have a trend of sharing here that say all of us use our skills in a way, but in the mainland it's not the same as that. Here we're family, we're cultured with everyone's culture, which is great because we think about giving back to the land, the Aina, every time. And it really matters on, I guess, what we're doing here at Talking Growth. It's because we want to highlight not only the business owners, but we want them to share their experience, learn from them, because like we're all underprivileged, right? Where we all don't know what is out there. We all can share
Or
something
the
about
reality
ourselves,
of the facts.
and we exactly, and um, it goes to everything with my generation too. It's just like the internet is such a broad spectrum. You don't know what's real.
Yeah,
So why don't we put what's real in front of everyone?
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, and that's
Love
that's
that.
one of the reasons we started Talking Growth, and as well as to invoke curiosity in those who aren't even business owners or thinking of becoming a business owner, and what it really entails to be a business owner. That's why we talk about the successes as well as the failures, the ups and downs, and the trials and tribulations, because it's not all peaches and cream, guys. I want you to know that, you
Yeah.
guys out there listening, it's not always going to be easy. It's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint.
You guys heard it here first from Ra himself that not everything is peaches and cream. So
It's not, man. It's not.
yeah,
Life is sweet, life is grand. That doesn't always translate to business. So we're liking to keep it real here, and then hopefully we can help people avoid some of the failures that comes with starting a business, or if you have a business already.
so Jen, do you have any questions about us that maybe we could help in some sort of way that what we know how to do
Mm.
that can help you in your business?
Well, just being here today all together is wonderful and is a big help. And I think also just this what you've created here and what you want to give to entrepreneurs or leaders at all levels. And I'm really keen to hear a little bit more about what you hope leaders to get from this show.
Okay, Foster, you want to start?
Yeah. So for me personally, and a little bit selfishly, I wanted to work on my craft as being a leader. I've I've had multiple businesses. Um, I'm now entering the stage of becoming. Well, I've already been a father for 3 years, but I want to be a more, what is it called, like, effective leader, a more effective father, a more effective listener, with my partner, and a
You
better.
guys heard that, right? He's not single.
Yeah, I'm happily married to my wonderful wife, and my 2.5 kids. Well, 2 3/4 kids. She'll be here soon, but I just wanted to be. I want to be better all around, all the way around. And before, I know that some of my ego, like we talked about in the past, allowed me to use sometimes my intellect and my intelligence to then be overbearing. I would talk too much. I wouldn't listen that often. I would, cut people off. I would make a lot of jokes that were kind of like, um, demeaning now that I look back at it, right?
Mhm.
And so I was real vulgar in my language. I didn't articulate a lot. And so in starting a podcast and starting my business, I wanted to work on that and and I knew that it's going to be a marathon. And my first podcast that I created was not that good at all. There was chickens in the background. I cursed a lot. I would rant a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get into this with you and,
Yeah.
try to work on that, as well as helping those who are coming up as well, or who have already been established as business.
Yeah, and I'd say it's sort of similar for me. There's two sides of it where I'd say that it's both selfless and selfish at the
Mhm.
same time. The selfless side that I saw is that a lot of my friends that I know, they've always wanted to talk about some dream of starting something. And in my own right, that I've tried to do achieve some of the goals that I've already done. And I've been sort of in my own way successful at that. I wanted to pave a path for people to see what it looks like to work hard and say if even if it doesn't work out, that people could see the work and the actual effort that it took. So that was the main goal for me for starting this, and also to encourage someone to start something, whether it's a competitive podcast, whether it's a service business, a product, or anything. Selfishly, I wanted to also work on my communication skills. I know that all of us, we don't tend to talk like productive conflict. We don't tend to talk in a way that helps people, and it's usually more in the selfish act of like how we talked. And learning from that one book that I mentioned, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I go back to that book once almost every 3 months with reading the highlights that I've read, highlighted. And that's helped me understand more of like diving into what a person is and who that person is. So selfishly, that I wanted to become a better communicator, to be able to present myself for everyone out there. So
I love that you both shared that side and maybe your personal connection to this. And sometimes for my clients, I take a moment to bring together self-serving and people-serving. They're interdependent. We can self-serve and people-serve at the same time. And sometimes we get really caught up in being too selfish or feeling too selfish. And a good thing is like, how do we link some of the things that you want to do to the things that this community needs and the greater community? And when you bring those two things together, that's quite powerful. And they're no longer at odds. Now they're feeding each other.
Yeah.
And so you can have a great pursuit and you can say, it's because I want to do this and I want to do that. And then look at the people you're bringing along.
Right.
And don't forget that people are running with you.
Right.
Right? And when you remember that people are running with you, it reminds you not to go too far into the selfish side, brings you back into the people side.
It takes a village.
But if you go too far in the people side, like, why are you doing it, right? We
Right.
need some anchors. Like, what's your hook? What's your anchor? And then how's that anchor helping others?
Right.
Right. Sometimes helping people too much too ends up becoming a burden for yourself.
Can be.
So it's always in business, you got to know how to pay yourself first.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to provide for yourself, but also be able to provide for the people that you're helping.
Absolutely.
Because I've seen times where people are pursuing for the purpose of money when it starts to for business. The purpose of this podcast was not for money to begin with.
Right.
It's to help people. It's to make sure that it provides the value. And of course, if they wanted to work with us, sure, why not? But at the same time, this is more for them than it is for us.
And in some ways too, also to build some legitimacy with what we're talking about, because a lot of the time people just speak and speak and speak, and there's no authority that's there saying like what they're saying is true. And so having local business owners come on and talk and speak about what they experience and what's going on, it takes away from the assumption that we're like, oh, this is what happens in business and this is what happens in business. It's like it's not us saying this is the guests that are on our show, and we're giving them the mic and the time to let us know and let the world know what they went through.
I love that, because sometimes you can read the books, whether it's on business or on conflict or on leadership or on people skills, and you're like, oh, okay, the book says this is how it should always be. No, it can be different. It
Right.
depends. Sometimes the situation makes it different. Sometimes the people make it different. Sometimes the culture and context makes it different.
Right.
Sometimes language, translated into a different language,
Yeah.
different,
that's big.
right? So just knowing that, and I think back to the pandemic when we were locked down here on Kauai. If I just looked online and I just looked at the news and I just looked at the whatever broadcast was coming in through my computer, I would have thought this world is a horrible, horrible place, right?
Yeah, no.
And I looked outside my window and I saw kids playing on the street. I saw families having time together. And I was like, this is a beautiful world.
Wow.
Depends on where you look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes we got to remind ourselves to look, like, not just in the books, not just online. And I love reading. I read a lot of books. So definitely go for books if you like it, but it's not, business is not in the books,
Right.
right? We learn a lot. Conflict is not just in the books. Conflict is in this room.
It's in the people.
It's in the people. It's in the self. It's in the way that you feel right now and the way that you go out in this world and the way that you interact.
I love that.
Right. Right.
I love that. Wow. We've touched on a lot of points here. What you got for Jen? You got something else?
Huh, man, you touched upon kids playing outside and how the world can really put a manipulation in your head with what it looks like. I would say, coming from the mainland perspective, that's kind of tough because nowadays a lot of people stay indoors.
Mm.
It's they don't have the luxury of say enjoying like going outside as much as we do over here. I think that's a huge blessing about Kauai and Hawaii itself. Um, but the East Coast, everyone is always just on the go, and
Mm.
you're stuck on this quote unquote rat race, and not just because of a job, but because you are stuck in that wheel of how everyone else lives. And I've seen that time and time before because you see it with everyone's social media. If they wanted to go out, they would drink and post about their food, you know? So it's
Yeah.
like we're always trying to show some sort of front of who we are, but how do we really go about showing ourselves?
Mm. Such a
The
great
real
question.
self.
Yeah, and the real self starts with definitely getting out of the house. And I'm from the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Montreal, Canada, city of about 3 million. I live surrounded by concrete most of my life, and we are so lucky here.
Mm-hmm.
We are so lucky here, and many people don't have access to nature, don't have access to the ocean, don't have access to clean air.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of the house no matter what.
Mm.
Because we can easily get locked in, and same with when you're dealing with a tough conflict or a tough pattern. Sometimes I just tell my clients, just go for a walk, even if it's in the middle of downtown whichever city. Don't go into that restaurant and take a selfie, right?
Right.
Like, just go for a walk, leave the technology behind.
Yep.
Just settle in with yourself,
Yep.
just have that moment, take a few breaths, and even if that's all you got, just take
Mhm.
a few breaths. It's amazing what it can do, and it changes the way you look at the problem.
Yeah.
And it changes the way you look at the people. And anything that helps you see from a new vantage point, from a
Mhm.
new perspective, helps a lot.
I love that because I've seen and I've done things that you've mentioned of putting your phone down
Yeah.
and just focusing on what's in front of you. What I've seen from that too, though, is like say if you're going out for dinner with a few friends or whoever, that you look at the other tables, people are on their phones.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like we don't know how to have a conversation with each other anymore.
Yeah.
It's true. That
Is it
part is
because we're,
tough.
is it because we're trying to avoid conflict? Is that why?
I wish I had one good answer for that, right?
Right.
Just like, here it is in a package.
Ah.
But it's different things to different people. We're dealing with a lot of social anxiety too.
Mm.
And you know what? It's normal because social life is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter which way you look at it, you're going to feel uncomfortable at some point.
Right.
And so the big thing, I think the phone relieves a bit of that tension.
Mhm.
And you know what? Sometimes it's okay to feel tension. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's okay to feel uncomfortable. And if you can be okay with feeling a bit uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
you're moving in the right direction, because then you're going to be a little bit more bulletproof for the next encounter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you said that because then it brings me back to way when we first started talking is when you do feel that little bit of tension like we all go through, you feel a little bit of stress or confinement, maybe ask yourself and get more curious of why that is or how you can avoid that.
Yeah.
And take a deep breath, man. It's
Right.
life is hard, but it's
Life
okay.
is hard.
Life is beautiful.
I heard some wise man say it's not all peaches and cream.
That's so true.
And
That's so
curiosity
true.
did not kill the cat.
Curiosity did
At
not kill
all,
the cat.
at all. And if you're just tuning in with us, we're here talking growth with Jen, and we're just diving into all of the conflict resolutions and ways to
Mm.
ground yourself and not be so hard on yourself and get outside and take a deep breath and take a walk every once in a while.
Right. And I guess I also want to add on before we close you out. What advice could you give to the next generation
Mm-hmm.
In general,
in general?
like any bit of advice.
The best
I'd
advice
say,
you got.
I'd say
Oh,
related
the best
to
advice.
related to what you have gone through, especially with working with people for your business.
I would say, again, just like practice feeling uncomfortable here and there. And if you feel fear, try to find that little bit of curiosity to help you uncover it and move beyond it. Because if we stay on our phones around the dinner table, like, we're going to lose so much of what's important to being human. And you know what? Then we might as well be replaced by AI. And that's a different
Right.
topic. But if we want to be, you know, getting ahead in this lifetime, we have to remember what makes us human. And some of that is the way we relate to each other. And so phones are great. They're fun. I have one. I'm on it a lot.
Yeah.
But put it down.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out how to connect with people.
Right.
And if it's uncomfortable, it's good. You're in the game.
Mm.
Just stay with that a little bit longer, because everyone's uncomfortable with you. We're all humans fumbling through life.
Right.
Yep.
Just doing our part.
That's awesome. How can the people reach you and get your services?
You can check out my website, productiveconflict.us, or you can reach me by email, jennifer@productiveconflict.us.
That's awesome.
Nice. Well, you guys heard it here first. There is solutions to your conflict.
There's a lot of solutions.
There's so
and
many
There's
solutions.
so many solutions.
Jen has opened up a lot of things in our minds, actually, just from this
100%.
conversation of what we could probably improve on ourselves.
I'm gonna be calling you at like 2 a.m. like, Jen, I need your help. No,
I don't answer my phone at 2 a.m.
I wouldn't do you like that.
So straight to voicemail.
All right,
Good.
guys, if you're listening, this is Talking Growth. You are with Emil, and
Rah.
I am glad that we had Jen over for today. And
Thank you both.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Yes.
Appreciate you. That was dope.
All right, until next time, everybody.
That was fun.
You guys are fun.